"You think you're tough, old man? This is our corner now. Go back to your rocking chair." The sneering voice dripped with contempt, the speaker looming over the frail figure like a predatory bird. The elderly man, stooped with age and clad in faded, worn clothes, offered no resistance, his eyes holding a depth that the younger men couldn't begin to fathom. He simply nodded, a quiet resignation that fueled their arrogance. This was the moment it began, a seemingly insignificant act of cruelty against a nobody, an act that would ignite a fire across the nation. They thought he was just an old man, easy prey. They were about to discover they had just kicked a sleeping lion. Comment respect, if you believe dignity is earned, not given, and type honor, if you stand with those who served. Elias Thorne wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. At 83, his frame was thin, his movements slow, marked by the passage of 8 decades and a lifetime of quiet endurance. He lived alone in a small, unassuming house on the edge of town, tending a modest garden and spending his days in quiet reflection. To the casual observer, he was just another elderly resident, perhaps a bit forgetful, certainly harmless. But beneath the surface of his gentle smile and soft-spoken demeanor lay a reservoir of strength forged in fire and tested in the crucible of war. Elias was a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, a ghost of battles long past. His name etched not just on crumbling stone memorials but in the memories of a dwindling few who had stood alongside him in places the history books barely mention. He rarely spoke of those times. His service wasn't a badge to be worn, but a chapter of his life he carried within him, heavy with sacrifice and silent pride. The world had moved on, and Elias Thorne had retreated into the quiet rhythm of retirement, his heroism invisible to the busy streets around him. The incident occurred on a sun-drenched afternoon, a day like any other until it wasn't. Elias was walking home from the small grocery store downtown, a worn canvas bag holding his few purchases. As he turned onto the main street, a roar of engines shattered the calm. A group of men on motorcycles, their leather vests emblazoned with the notorious Hell's Angels patch, blocked the sidewalk, their presence an immediate, aggressive assertion of dominance. They were young, loud, full of a crude vitality that bristled with menace. Elias attempted to step around them, offering a polite, "Excuse me." But one of the riders, a burly man with a scowl etched permanently on his face, swung his leg out, blocking the path. "Where do you think you're going, Pops?" he sneered, his companions chuckling. Elias paused, his gaze steady but unwavering. "Just trying to get home," he replied softly. The leader, sensing an easy target, dismounted, swaggering towards Elias. "This is our street now. Maybe you should find another way." Elias didn't argue. He began to turn, ready to take a longer route, when another rider barked, "Hey, look at that old bag, probably full of pennies he stole from a fountain." He lunged forward, grabbing Elias's grocery bag. Elias, despite his age, held on instinctively. The man yanked harder, and Elias stumbled, falling backward onto the concrete. The bag ripped, sending a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a few oranges scattering across the pavement. The men laughed, a harsh, grating sound. The leader stepped closer, his face inches from Elias's, still lying on the ground. "Teach you some respect, old man," he snarled, and then he delivered a swift, brutal kick to Elias's ribs. A sharp pain shot through Elias's side, stealing his breath. The men kicked his groceries further down the street, scattering them deliberately, before roaring away on their bikes, leaving Elias bruised and winded on the ground, surrounded by the remnants of his simple afternoon shopping trip. Passers-by slowed, some gawked, but fear of the gang kept most at a distance. A few kind souls eventually helped him up, gathered what they could, and saw him home. The humiliation stung more than the physical pain. They had treated him like dirt, less than human, simply because he was old and seemed weak. But the fire that had burned in him decades ago was not extinguished, merely banked. The news of the attack on the elderly veteran spread quickly, thanks to one of the neighbors who had witnessed the incident and reported it to the local police, mentioning Elias's Marine service. The police response was initially standard, filing a report. noting the gang's involvement but warning Elias that these groups were hard to track and prosecute. Felt dismissive, another layer of frustration. But the seed had been planted. Marine veteran, the report read. This detail, perhaps insignificant to the local desk sergeant dealing with petty crime, landed on the desk of Detective Ramirez, a young officer with a keen sense of justice and a history buff's interest in military history. Something about 83-year-old Marine veteran triggered a flicker of curiosity. He dug a little deeper into Elias Thorne's background, the official record sparse, classified. He hit dead ends but felt a growing unease. Why was this veteran's file so restricted? Meanwhile, the community rallied. Word of the Hells Angels attacking an old Marine spread online, fueled by outrage. Local news picked it up. Elderly veteran attacked by gang. The story gained traction, not just for the brutality, but for the identity of the victim, a man who had served his country, now vulnerable and disrespected. Elias remained quiet, accepting help from neighbors but refusing to make a fuss. He patched up his small wound, cleaned his house, and returned to his routine, his dignity intact even if his body ached. But the injustice gnawed at others. The attackers, emboldened by their perceived impunity, remained in town, their presence a constant threat. The tension in the small community grew palpable. Detective Ramirez couldn't shake the feeling that Elias Thorne was more than the records showed. He reached out to a contact in military archives, pulling strings he probably shouldn't have. The initial response was boilerplate, citing security classifications. Ramirez pushed harder, explaining the situation: an elderly veteran brutally attacked by a notorious gang, minimal police resources making it hard to track them, and the need to understand who this man was to gauge potential threats or find connections. He mentioned Elias's age and the specific time frame of his service indicated in the sparse file. The archivist, a gruff former colonel named Miller, listened patiently. When Ramirez mentioned the name Elias Thorne and the approximate years of service, Miller went silent. A long pause stretched across the phone line. "Thorne," Miller finally rasped, his voice suddenly low and gravelly. "Elias Thorne?" Ramirez confirmed. Another, even longer pause. "Detective," Miller said, his tone shifting from bureaucratic to something bordering on reverence. "Are you telling me Elias Thorne was attacked by common thugs?" Ramirez felt a jolt. This wasn't the reaction he expected. "Yes, sir. Assaulted, robbed, kicked while he was down. By some Hell's Angels." Colonel Miller let out a slow, deliberate breath. "Send me everything you have on this incident. Everything. His address, everything. And detective, treat Mr. Thorne with the utmost respect. You have no idea who that man is." Miller didn't wait for a reply before hanging up. Ramirez was left with a sense of profound confusion and a rapidly growing realization that he had stumbled onto something far larger than a simple assault case. He immediately drove back to Elias Thorne's house, his perspective entirely altered. He sat with Elias, not just as a detective taking a statement, but with a newfound, albeit uninformed, deference. Elias recounted the events quietly, without bitterness, simply stating the facts. He mentioned the pain, the scattered groceries, the laughter. He never raised his voice or showed anger, only a quiet sadness at the senselessness of it. Ramirez left Elias's house, his mind reeling, and immediately contacted Colonel Miller again, confirming the address and promising to send the report immediately. Colonel Miller wasted no time. The name Elias Thorne resonated deeply within certain circles of the military, a name whispered with awe and respect among veterans of a certain era. Within hours, the seemingly insignificant assault on an elderly man in a quiet town had triggered a response that reached the highest levels. A Marine Corps liaison officer was dispatched, not to investigate the crime, but to assess the well-being of Elias Thorne. Alongside him came Colonel Miller himself, foregoing protocol. They arrived the next morning, two imposing figures in crisp uniforms, stepping out of an unmarked official vehicle in front of Elias's humble home. Detective Ramirez, who had been asked to be present, watched in stunned silence as Colonel Miller, a decorated officer, approached Elias's front door, not with the brisk knock of officialdom, but with a hesitant, almost deferential posture. Elias opened the door, a faint smile on his face. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the uniforms, then settled on Miller. "Colonel," Elias said softly, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Miller visibly straightened, snapped to attention, and delivered a salute so sharp and precise it seemed to crackle in the air. "Master Sergeant Thorne," Miller's voice boomed, filled with emotion that surprised even himself. "On behalf of the United States Marine Corps and a grateful nation, it is an honor to stand in your presence again." Detective Ramirez's jaw dropped. "Master Sergeant?" Elias had never mentioned rank. Elias Thorne simply nodded, a quiet acceptance of the formal recognition. "At ease, Colonel," Elias said, his voice still soft, but carrying an undeniable authority that belied his frail appearance. He invited them in. Inside, the officers explained that the report of his attack, coupled with the mention of his name, had initiated an immediate and significant response. Colonel Miller explained who Elias Thorne truly was, not just a Marine veteran, but the Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, a legend of clandestine operations, a hero of uncountable missions that remained classified, a man whose quiet courage and unparalleled skill had saved hundreds of lives in the shadows of history. He wasn't just a veteran. He was a ghost warrior, a man who had carried the heaviest burdens in silence, asking for nothing in return. The news of Master Sergeant Elias Thorne's true identity spread like wildfire, first through official channels connected by Colonel Miller, then through military veteran networks online, and finally exploding into mainstream media. The story of the elderly man attacked by a motorcycle gang was no longer a local incident. It was an international outrage. Attacking a defenseless elderly man was despicable. Attacking this defenseless elderly man, a national hero whose past deeds were slowly beginning to surface, carefully vetted, of course, to maintain necessary secrecy but emphasizing his profound impact, was an act of unthinkable disrespect and criminal folly. The Hells Angels chapter responsible suddenly found themselves the target of unprecedented scrutiny. Law enforcement agencies at every level, alerted by the sudden high-level interest stemming from Colonel Miller's involvement, began coordinating their efforts. Veteran organizations mobilized, not with threats of violence, but with offers of support, legal aid, and a powerful public voice demanding justice. The national outrage was palpable. How could men wearing colors that signified a twisted sense of brotherhood and power attack someone who represented true, quiet strength and sacrifice? The Hells Angels involved, who had scattered after the initial incident feeling confident they were untouchable, found their world rapidly shrinking. Their names and faces, initially known only locally, were now circulating everywhere. Their criminal records, however minor, were being scrutinized. Their movements were being tracked. The perceived impunity they enjoyed evaporated overnight, replaced by the chilling reality of being hunted, not just by the police, but by the collective will of a nation demanding justice for a hero. The climax arrived swiftly and decisively. The Hells Angels involved in the attack, cornered by coordinated law enforcement efforts fueled by the intense public and official pressure, were apprehended. They weren't brought in quietly. Their arrests were publicized, sending a clear message. The trial, when it came, was highly unusual. Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, despite his preference for anonymity, agreed to testify. He walked into the courtroom not as a victim, but with the quiet dignity of a man who had faced down far greater threats. The courtroom was packed media, veterans in uniform, concerned citizens. The defendants, stripped of their leather and bravado, looked small and terrified. They had underestimated Elias Thorne in the most profound way possible. Colonel Miller was present, sitting in the front row, a silent, powerful symbol of the military's stance. When Elias spoke, his voice was soft, steady. He recounted the attack, the kicks, the scattering of his groceries. But he didn't dwell on the pain. He spoke of the feeling of being disposable, of being seen as worthless because of his age. He spoke of service, not his own, but the concept of giving oneself for something larger. He looked directly at the defendants, not with anger, but with a profound, almost pitying sadness. "You saw an old man," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. You saw weakness. You didn't see a life lived, sacrifices made, a country served. You saw nothing you valued. That is the saddest part. The impact of his words was devastating. The prosecutor then presented evidence of the defendant's other criminal activities unearthed during the massive investigation triggered by the attack. Colonel Miller was called as a character witness not just for Elias, but for the very idea of what Elias represented. Miller spoke of Master Sergeant Thorne's classified missions, hinting at their critical importance without revealing state secrets. He painted a picture of a man whose quiet presence had steered the course of history in subtle but profound ways. He described the respect Elias commanded from those who knew. By the time the defense had a chance to speak, the outcome was sealed. The defendants were convicted not just for the assault, but for other crimes, facing significant sentences. Their faces, once sneering, were etched with shame and disbelief. The vindication was complete. The man they had dismissed as an old nobody had, through his quiet endurance and the revelation of his hidden legacy, brought down their small empire of intimidation. As Elias left the courtroom, a spontaneous standing ovation erupted. Veterans saluted. People wept. Elias simply nodded, a faint smile on his face, his eyes holding a mix of weariness and quiet triumph. His honor, so brutally attacked, was not just restored. It was magnified for the world to see. In the aftermath, life for Elias Thorne changed, but not entirely. He still lived in his quiet house, still tended his garden. But the world around him had shifted. Neighbors who had once offered polite waves now stopped to talk, to express gratitude, to simply stand in the presence of a true hero. The Hells Angels chapter involved in the attack was dismantled, its members scattered and incarcerated. The larger organization faced increased scrutiny, its reputation severely damaged by the public relations nightmare of attacking a beloved veteran. Elias received letters from across the country, from fellow veterans, from young people inspired by his story, from strangers simply wishing him well. He handled it all with his characteristic humility. He quietly accepted help when offered, like the group of local veterans who repaired his fence and spruced up his garden. He occasionally gave short, soft-spoken interviews, not to boast of his past, but to speak about the importance of respect, of looking beyond appearances, of remembering those who serve. He became a symbol, a reminder that strength isn't always loud, that heroes walk among us in the most unassuming forms, and that true value lies not in power or wealth, but in character and sacrifice. His story served as a powerful lesson. Judge not by appearances, for beneath the surface of an elderly man, there might reside the heart of a lion, a warrior who has already faced and overcome the world's greatest challenges. The quiet dignity Elias Thorne displayed throughout the ordeal resonated deeply, proving that honor, once earned, can never truly be taken away, can only be revealed. The resolution was a testament to the power of hidden strength and the collective will of a nation to defend its heroes. Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, the quiet veteran, had not only survived a brutal attack but had, through the revelation of his remarkable past, brought down the perpetrators and reaffirmed the values of respect and honor. The Hells Angels involved faced justice, their arrogance shattered by the weight of who they had truly wronged. Elias continued his quiet life, but now with the silent knowledge that his service was seen, his sacrifices acknowledged, and his dignity fiercely protected. His story will be remembered as a powerful reminder that true strength often resides in the most unexpected places, and that disrespecting those who have served is an act that the world will not tolerate. Subscribe to my channel if you believe that heroes walk among us, often in plain sight, and share this story to spread the message that respect is earned, not demanded, and that age should never be mistaken for weakness.